Bullman Bar Thug x Silent Little Apprentice, fictional world, fictional background. On Bullman Street in England, an Asian girl named Dawn, who was abandoned by her father and sold to Bullman Bar, crawled out of a cargo box and got into a fight with a bar doctor. She was then beaten black and blue by the bar thug. "Son, are you still running? Run!" Tang An instinctively wanted to escape from this violent bar, but gradually realized that he was extremely compatible with this absurd and passionate world. Day 1 Bourman. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. De co lois ara trong quatrin lay text. On the second day, Shirley. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. A brand new Harley gracefully parked at the back door of the bar, with its long legs and high heels easily supporting the heavy body of the car. The helmet was taken off, revealing a face that was incredibly beautiful. A head of silver hair slid off his shoulder, with lake green pupils that were pale in color. He had a high nose and deep eyes, and his beautiful and dangerous eyes narrowed slightly, looking like a contented and resting snow leopard. The woman stretched lazily with a helmet in her hand, and the tight motorcycle suit outlined her almost perfect figure curve. Shirley hung her helmet on the handlebar and lazily pushed open the door in her high heels, entering the bar. The music in the bar was deafening, but almost as soon as the woman entered, it fell silent. People held their breath and looked at this beautiful woman, her silver hair against the light, out of place with everything dirty here. Shirley ignored the gaze of all the men and women in the bar and walked freely across the dance floor. "Hey, honey." A man on stage bravely whistled. "Oh hi, dear." Shirley turned her head, squinted her eyes, raised her 2 fingers together, and blew a kiss on her lips. The crowd boiled up, with whistles and shouts coming and going. People on stage hooked onto the man's shoulder, cheering and dancing their bodies. Shirley is so beautiful, she deserves to have crazy charm. At this moment, Tang An was lying on the hospital bed in the medical room on the 2nd floor, soundly asleep. Melissa hugged her arm and looked at the wrapped girl. The girl had short, soft black hair, slightly furrowed eyebrows, black and dense eyelashes covering her slightly dark eyes, and a few freckles on her pale face. Her fragile face looked obedient, almost unimaginable that the beast-like guy before was also her. The girl's height is not actually short, around 5 feet and 5 inches to the eye, but due to her thin body, she is so thin that her ribs can be seen, making people feel that this guy is thin and small like a cub that can be lifted with one hand. As for this, Melissa thought, go to his mother small, this whelp bites people like a wolf. Just as he was thinking about it, Tang An's eyebrows furrowed slightly, and his black eyelashes trembled a few times before slowly opening his eyes. A pair of dark eyes, as if able to suck everything in. "Wake up." Tang An lay down and adapted for a while, then slowly propped up the bed, swaying and sitting up. The pain below her ribs made her frown slightly. Melissa leaned against the foot of the bed with her arms around her, waiting for her to collapse and cry or say something. Tang An sat upright, leaning against the head of the bed and quietly drooping her eyelashes. Her slightly long hair was hanging beside her cheeks, and her thin shoulders were hunched, looking a bit pitiful. "Hey, kid," Melissa handed her a glass of water with a stern face, "are you going to cry?" Tang An seemed to be startled by the interruption in his thinking. Subconsciously, he shrank his shoulders, opened his eyes wide, and looked straight at Melissa. Melissa saw her appearance and the unhealed bite on her hand began to ache faintly. She raised her eyebrows and stuffed the water glass into Tang An's hand, quickly taking 2 steps back. "Hey, do you know where you are?" Tang An held a water glass and moved his lips. "I know." After speaking, Tang An seemed to have made a great decision. His throat rolled up and down and he whispered, "Is there anything to eat?" Melissa was a bit surprised and couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. "Wait," she said, turning around and leaving Tang An alone in the infirmary. When Melissa returned with a few breads, she only saw an empty hospital bed and blood splattered out from pulling out a few drops. Shit. Melissa frowned angrily and pressed down on the walkie-talkie on the wall. Jason. Bog. Anyone. Come to the infirmary. That kid has run away. Each room on the second floor of this bar is equipped with a walkie-talkie, which leads directly to the thugs' rooms. After all, accidents always come faster than pleasure in such places. Therefore, when Melissa pressed the walkie-talkie, Jason with a gloomy face rushed out the door. Melissa was so angry that she threw the bread onto the table. The sound of chasing and tearing came from downstairs, as well as Jason's chilling roar mixed with Spanish. A sound of falling came, and Jason kicked open the door of the medical room, holding Tang An's struggling collar in his hand. Johnson rudely threw Tang An to the ground, and Tang An's back hit the cabinet with a thud, causing him to curl up in pain. Take it easy, Jason. Melissa's eyebrows and eyes flashed with anger. Are you going to let your money go to waste? Shut up. Jason yelled back angrily, pinching the muscles of his neck and getting close to Melissa's face. You can't even watch a son of a bitch. Who would have thought she would run? Melissa, without any fear, frowned and tapped the table, her voice more than twice as loud as Johnson's. Can you? What do you bring back? Jensen pressed his tongue against his back teeth and nodded with his eyes wide open. He shifted his gaze to Tang An on the ground and took a few steps up, lifting him up as he struggled to get up. Tang An's mouth was bleeding, and his right face was swollen, clearly slapped. Suddenly lifted by Johnson, Tang An clenched his wrists tightly with both hands, pursed the corners of his mouth, and a pair of black eyes stared at Johnson without blinking. Enough, Johnson. Melissa closed her eyes, trying to calm herself down. Put her down. Shit. Johnson let go and Tang An fell straight to the ground. Tang An propped up his upper body with both hands, and Jason moved his neck, squatting down, his face close to Tang An's eyes. Tang An looked at him with black eyes like small beasts, their noses almost touching each other. Jason lit a cigarette, took a puff, and sprayed the choking smoke on Tang An's face. Tang An looked at him with burning eyes, pursed his lips, and did not move. Are you still running, kid? Jason raised his chin at her. Run. Tang An said a bite clearly and firmly. Shit. Jensen was furious and raised his hand before slapping it. Hi, Jason. A whistle saved Tang An's life, and Jason's hand stopped, turning his head stiffly. A sexy woman leaned against the door, her motorcycle suit had been changed off, and she had changed into a slim-fitting top and motorcycle pants. Her silver curly hair was tied high at the back of her head, and her perfect figure was even more curvaceous in a reclining position. What's that? Shirley held an unlit lady's cigarette between her fingertips and smiled as she raised her hand towards Johnson, swaying the ornament on her ear with her movements. It's a brat. Johnson stood up, revealing Tang An sitting on the ground. Shirley looked up and down at Tang An, raised her eyebrows with interest, put away her cigarette, and walked over this way. Tang An looked up, lifted his long eyelashes, and met Shirley's pale green pupils. Tang An was immediately stunned and slightly widened his eyes. Ah! Tang An's enlarged pupils reflected Shirley's silver curly hair, light lake green eyes, and the scrutinizing gaze hidden behind those smiling eyes. Dangerous and beautiful, like some kind of feline. The dirty face showed a bewildered expression, and only Shirley remained in her dark eyes. A bit devout, but also a bit pitiful. Shirley walked up to Tang An, squatted down, squinted her heart-wrenching eyes, and approached Tang An. Tang An smelled a faint scent of roses, as touching and dangerous as the woman approaching her. If you hug her so recklessly, you will definitely be stabbed all over with blood. Tang An's pupils twitched, and a frenzy of worship for power appeared in his pitch-black eyes, even his breathing relaxed. Watched by Tang An's seductive gaze, Shirley couldn't help but laugh and deliberately leaned in close to this nervous little guy. Tang An's eyelashes trembled for a moment and he held his breath. Shirley was very patient this time, staring at the crazy little beast in her eyes. She reached out and gently touched Tang An's swollen cheek. "Does it hurt, little one?" Tang An looked straight into his lake-like eyes, his throat twitched a few times before he found his voice and said, "No." "That's great." Shirley smiled and her slender fingers hooked her chin. Tang An didn't resist, his gaze fixed on Shirley, and he obediently lifted his head. Shirley tilted her head to examine the wound on her body, then lowered Tang An's chin and stood up. Jason, who was waiting on the side, had already finished smoking a cigarette. Shirley walked over, patted his shoulder, pulled him aside, and lowered her voice. "Jason, what are you planning to do with this guy? What else can I do if I go to public relations?" Johnson put his hands in his pockets, shrugged his broad shoulders, and glanced at Tang An. Tang An looked up, his dark gaze still staring blankly at Sherry's face. "Come on." Shirley pulled out the lady's cigarette and lit it, the smoke tangled with her silver hair. "Do you think she's suitable for public relations? Damn it, there will always be men ordering it. Are you missing a thug, Jason?" Shirley took a puff of smoke, her beautiful face faintly visible in the smoke. "I remember Alvin died last year. The thug. She." Even Johnson couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, twitch his muscles on his face, and take a rough step forward. "She looks like this. Dot." Sherry didn't say a word, just took a cigarette and gave Jensen a gentle glance, making the irritable muscular man shut up. Johnson suppressed the latter half of his sentence, and Shirley's smile returned to her face. She slowly exhaled a mouthful of smoke, and the oppressive feeling that had caused Johnson disappeared immediately. "It's okay, we can make a bet." "What?" Jensen was taken aback and said softly. "Let's make a bet and see if she's suitable for public relations." Shirley smiled, squinting her eyes like a feline, patting Jason's shoulder, and then walking towards Melissa, who had been leaning on her arm all along, taking out a bag of things from her pocket. "No, what you want?" Melissa calmly took it over and twisted the powder in the bag with her hand. Her face slightly improved and she said, Thank you, Shirley." "You're welcome." Shirley saw Melissa reach out and take out the money from her pocket, immediately holding her hand down. "Oh no, I don't like this." "Yeah." Melissa put the money back into her pocket, sarcastically curling the corners of her mouth and raising her eyebrows. "With just one word from you, countless men will bring money up." Shirley shook her head and smiled noncommittally. "Oh dear, don't mock me." After saying these words, Shirley waved her hand while holding a cigarette and walked out on her leather boots. The long ornaments on her ears swayed with the sound of her footsteps. Only Johnson and Melissa looked at each other. "Fighter." "Ha." Johnson let out a cold snort with a stiff face, turned his head, and walked towards Tang An, who was still sitting on the ground. Tang An regained consciousness as he took the first step, vigilantly watching Johnson get closer and closer. Jason lifted his leg and kicked Tang An, who hugged his head and fell to the ground with a thud. Cough. "Thank God, kid," Jason said with a calm face and another kick. "It's his mother lucky." "All right, Jason," Melissa snapped at him, "don't vent your anger like a coward." Jason cursed a few more words and turned around to leave. Melissa was obviously still angry about Tang An's escape and threw all the bread brought from the table into the trash can. "You have nothing to eat, kid," she said. Tang An lay curled up on the ground, with one eye peeking out from his scattered black hair, fixed on the trash can. As expected, Melissa didn't catch her eye in the latter half of the night, and Tang An still ate those few breads. On the third day, Princess. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. After staying in the medical room for almost a week, Tang An gradually returned to normal, and his previous wild animal-like behavior gradually became like a person, and he also began to speak slowly. After returning to a normal diet, Tang An's weight gradually recovered, at least no longer as thin as a sick animal cub. Seeing that she was well cultured, Melissa called for Johnson. After all, the money was spent by Johnson and he had to consider the distribution of this guy. In Burman, the purchased goods usually have only one purpose, which is public relations. In this place, apart from the princess and young master, in public relations, there are only muscular thugs left. To put it simply, there are only two options for this place: violence and pornography. For young people like Tang An who haven't even grown enough hair, public relations is definitely a necessary choice, but since Shirley has spoken, Jason also has to reconsider. In a small room on the second floor, Tang An sat on the bed, wearing a large and somewhat oversized T-shirt, with a wide hem that almost covered her shorts, revealing her wheat-colored calves and feet, and a loose neckline revealing part of her collarbone. The blueness on her cheeks had not yet subsided, and Melissa put a bandage on it, revealing a wound on her collarbone that was partially covered by a band-aid. Tang An sat quietly with his eyes down, his soft black hair resting on her cheek. And separated by a wall are Jason and Shirley. The two of them squeezed into a cramped small room, observing Tang An's every move through one-way transparent glass. Jason impatiently smoked without saying a word. Shirley closed her pale green eyes, her smooth forehead pressed against the glass, like a snow leopard, as if taking a nap. With a click, the door opened and the three of them raised their eyes at the same time. Tang An stared at the tall man who came in, while Jason and Shirley stared at Tang An. "Oh, this is the new product." The man pinched Tang An's chin and looked frivolously down his neck, following the collar and scrutinizing Tang An inch by inch. Tang An didn't hide and obediently lifted his head according to the man's movements. Rich businessman Hill grinned and said, "Isn't that quite well behaved? Jensen has trained quite well." As he spoke, Hill's hand touched down Don An's soft cheek, squinting his eyes as he leaned closer, sniffing her exposed ear and neck. Don An gently lowered his eyelashes and tilted his head against the force of his hand. Jason spat sarcastically on the other side of the wall, and Shirley curled her lips, playing with the cross pendant on her chest with her fingers, silently watching. No matter what vulgar words Hill said in her ear, Tang An didn't react much. A pair of black eyes showed a simple expression, quiet and without any intention of struggling. Until Hill grabbed her waist and pulled at her clothes, Tang An blinked his eyes, lifted a hand from his arm, and pointed in the direction of the bathroom. Tang An remained silent, looking at Hill with a faint pleading in his dark eyes. "What's wrong, little darling? Do you want me to take a shower?" Tang An nodded and let out a "Okay, baby, wait. Brother will be back soon." Hills chuckled and pinched Tang An's waist. Johnson sarcastically grinned, but in the next moment, his smile solidified on his face. As Hill turned around, Tang An almost picked up the copper candlestick on the bedside table like lightning. His originally black eyes were instantly filled with coldness and anger, and he crazily smashed down the back of Hill's head. Bang! With a loud bang, everyone froze. Except for Shirley, who was smiling and holding a gun. Tang An's candlestick had a corner cut off by a bullet, but even so, the candlestick remained intact. Tang An turned his head and stared blankly at Shirley holding a gun behind the broken glass, with the black muzzle pointing at him. Hill was also stunned. Seeing the obedient prey holding the weapon just now, no one could react. The first person to react was Hill, an Italian wealthy businessman who angrily cursed and viciously slapped Tang An in the face. Tang An was knocked down on the bed by the fan, and blood immediately flowed from the corner of his lips. However, before the next slap arrived, Tang An had already bounced up from the bed and swung the candlestick against Hill's head. Bang! There was another gunshot, and the bullet accurately hit the handle of the candlestick. This time, Tang An's weapon flew out directly. With the sound of the gun, Shirley kicked the glass and jumped into the small room. The silver curls fluttered along with the glass in the moment of jumping, and the tinkling decorations did not affect Shirley's performance at all. Before the three of them could see clearly, she had already jumped to the center of the room like an agile snow leopard. Shirley stood between the two, with one hand pressed against the enraged Hill, saying something in Italian to him. The other hand hooked the gun with her little finger, pressing down on Tang An's chest and pressing her onto the bed. Upon arrival, Jason pulled open Hill's angry face, restraining his fists and feet while quickly explaining in Italian. Tang An on this side was also struggling desperately, with a cold and angry expression in his black eyes, like some kind of wild beast that was full of hair and teeth after being provoked. All right, Shirley turned her head and knelt with one leg between Tang An's legs. She suppressed Tang An's struggling arms with one hand, her tone carrying a soothing smile. Calm down, little one. At this moment, Tang An could no longer appease him with words, gritting his teeth and struggling desperately. He let out a low roar of anger in his throat, as if he had to break free from Shirley's shackles and give the rogue wealthy businessman a lesson. Shirley's little finger hooked, the pistol turned, and it landed firmly in her hand. With a click sound, the dark gun pressed against Tang An's jaw, and the scorching temperature just after firing made Tang An shiver. Shoo, little one, don't make a fuss. Shirley lowered her voice dangerously, her beautiful face approached Tang An, and she smiled. Saying this, Shirley symbolically pulled the trigger, and with a click, Tang An's eyelashes trembled. Almost in an instant, Tang An recovered from that crazy state and no longer struggled. He lay in bed panting, his chest heaving, looking at the jet-black pistol and Shirley's sparkling eyes like lake water. Don't struggle anymore. Shirley smiled, released her grip on Tang An, pinned the scattered silver hair behind her ears, inserted the gun into her waist, and turned to the two men who were still arguing over there. All right, gentlemen, how has it been resolved? What kind of lunatic is this? I spent money and still have to risk taking harm. Hill's face turned red with anger, muttering in Italian. No, don't be agitated, sir. Shirley smiled and raised her hands to soothe her. We will refund you all your expenses and arrange compensation. I will bear all expenses. Hill cursed a few more excitedly, but Jensen stopped him from waving his fist. Tang An, who was lying in bed, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, slowly got up, sat up, and Jensen instinctively glanced at him, his pupils immediately contracting. Shirley. Gun. With Jensen's violent drink, Shirley immediately turned around and almost lightning-fast grabbed Tang An's wrist as he was about to raise the gun. I don't know when this guy has already taken the gun. At this moment, Tang An's hand holding the gun was tightly grasped by Shirley with one hand pointing towards the ground. Tang An's face showed crazy anger, and the arm holding the gun trembled incessantly due to the tense muscles. Hey, calm down, little one. Shirley's voice was soft and soothing, but her hand inexplicably tightened. Shirley exerted a lot of strength in her hands, and Tang An gritted his teeth in pain, but still stared at Hill tightly. The other hand clenched Shirley's wrist tightly. Tang An's hand clenched blue and purple marks on Shirley's white wrist, but Shirley's hand did not loosen at all. Tang An could even hear the sound of his wrist bone breaking. Shirley had an interested look in her eyes as she scrutinized her prey, and she bent down slightly to approach Tang An. Who is this guy trying to kill? Tang An's face turned pale in pain, but he still stared fiercely at Hill, his arm holding the gun tightly trembling. Shirley looked at her calm and angry black eyes and smiled softly in her ear, like a venomous snake, tempting Tang An. No, you can't do it. You haven't killed anyone before. Tang An's gaze locked on Hill without moving, his voice trembling, suppressing a frenzy. I have killed it before. With this sentence, gunshots rang out suddenly, and the bullet hit the ground with a bang, causing Hill, who was already nailed to the ground, to tremble in fear. Jason quickly pushed Hill out with a brace. Shirley got the answer she wanted and laughed with great satisfaction. Jason slammed the door shut, and Shirley also released her hand at the same time. Bada! The gun fell weakly to the ground, and Shirley stood up straight. She calmly pulled out a cigarette and lit it, gazing down at the little one whose chest was still heaving through the smoke. Tang An's entire right arm trembled due to detachment, and a blue and purple mark was clenched on his wrist. Sitting there, taking a few breaths, Tang An suddenly jumped up from the bed and pounced on the pistol that had fallen not far away, pursing the corners of his mouth. Ah! A sharp hand knife struck Tang An's neck, causing him to snort and pass out. Tang An's body collapsed limply, being grabbed by Shirley's hand and sandwiched in her arm. Shirley said, holding the cigarette in her hand and lifting Tang An's drooping chin. Her pale green eyes looked at the little guy's pale face, earning a rare appreciation. Jason did a good job this time. Sherry and Jason's bet angered wealthy businessman Hill, who is a famous diamond miner in the United States. Over the course of several days, people kept coming to Burman to cause trouble, but Johnson blocked them all. Jason was so angry that he almost wanted to kill someone. When he turned around and wanted to pull out the troublemaker Tang An and beat him up, the brat jumped up and crawled into the toilet compartment. Jason gritted his back teeth, his face muscles twitching, and his gloomy face prepared to kick her out of the compartment, only to collide with Shirley, who came out of the wash basin, wiping her hands and walking out. Shirley was dressed in a haute couture gown, with her silver hair curled up, revealing her fair neck. The low-cut and waisted dress made Shirley, who was already sexy, even more alluring. Seeing Johnson's foot already stepping on the compartment door, I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Is your honey inside? Shit. Johnson cursed, it's that kid. Shirley let out a meaningful, oh, and casually threw the precious handkerchief she had wiped into the trash can, looking at Jason with a smile. I'm going to find Hilbrant, and I'm afraid you need to maintain order in Burman. The irritable strong man opened his mouth several times but didn't utter a single syllable. Finally, he impatiently lit a cigarette, punched the wooden door in the compartment, and turned away. The wooden door, which had been punched with a punch mark, shook and creaked as it spun open, revealing Tang An squatting barefoot on the toilet. Shirley visited the famous Brent family on the same day, and in just one afternoon, the owner of the Brent family sent an apology letter. Noah, do you still need to send her to PR now? In Burman's employee restaurant, Shirley elegantly cut a steak and looked at Jason with a proud smile. Jason cursed a foul word, smoked a cigarette, and his gaze darkened as he hammered the table. The knives and forks on the plate bounced together. Damn it. I've lost all my money. Don't say that about Jason, Shirley squinted and her eyes lit up. You've bought something good. Fart. Jason cursed softly. To be honest, why did you buy her back then? Shirley smiled slightly and looked straight at Johnson, her pale green pupils giving an invisible pressure. Under such eyes, Jason twisted his neck, looked at the dinner plate silently, took 2 puffs of smoke, and slowly exhaled a puff of smoke. When I bought it, this kid was really his mother good. Looking. Where does it look good? Eyes. Good taste. Shirley curled her lips, her eyes slightly curved like those of a feline. Day 4 Rex. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Not everyone can be a thug for Burman. After consulting with the others, Johnson decided to give Don Ansay to the crazy Rex. After training, Tang An will participate in the underground arena of Burman's violence. If he is fortunate enough not to be killed, Tang An can become a thug. All thugs come this way. Rich businessmen with special interests will go to the underground arena to watch the competition and bet a lot of money on their favorite horses. A few years ago, the most famous was Shirley's arena competition. At that time, the red light district of Burman was even more obscene than it is now, with people reveling almost day and night. At that time, the arena race was played against several fierce pit dogs. As soon as the young and beautiful Shirley jumped into the pit of the bulldog, the people on stage applauded and cheered loudly. Shirley's hands were wrapped in bandages, and her silver hair, tied up high, was a bit dirty. Her perfect figure and steps immediately caught everyone's attention. The deep pit was filled with human corpses, soft and crumbling sludge mixed with blood and carrion, and bones were scattered everywhere. 3 tall and strong bit dogs, bared their teeth and dribbling their saliva, slowly surrounded each other. The people on stage held their breath, while Shirley stood still. With a low growl, a ferocious pit bull pounced on Sherry. Sherry, who was short in stature, used this force to fall and roll on the spot, flipping the pit bull over her. Shirley stood up with a rolling force and pulled out the thigh bones of a corpse buried in the mud with her bare hands. As the bitter dog turned around and pounced, she leaped up in the air with a perfect posture. Her silver long hair spread out in the air, carrying a leg bone that was stuck in half. Shirley looked like an agile and elegant snow leopard. Before people could appreciate the captivating waist and long legs, Shirley's sharp leg bones had already pierced the bitter's throat. Blood splattered onto Shirley's face, complementing her light green eyes. Shirley pulled her leg bones out of the bitter dog, making a biting sound of flesh and blood separation. Putting down the third pit dog, Sherry was splattered with crimson blood, and she lazily wiped the blood off her face. In the highly anticipated pit, Shirley stepped on the body of the bitter dog with 1 foot, threw down the leg bones in her hand, raised her hands with a smile, and blew a melodious whistle. "Hi everyone." After 3 seconds of silence, everyone boiled and cheered wildly, applauding loudly. Everyone was shouting Sherry's name loudly. "Shirley! Shirley! Shirley!" Shirley stood in the pit of the competition, holding her hands high, lifting her face and curling the corners of her mouth. Her gaze scanned the crazy crowd, beating the rhythm to the cheers. Shirley has a charm that can drive everything crazy. Everybody, everywhere. Is it gone? It's gone. Tang An stood in front of the training room door, looking up at Shirley. Recently, this little guy has gradually been able to communicate normally, and Shirley is a bit relieved. "There are only so many processes in the arena competition, little guy. What other problems do you have? Why do I need to?" Tang An paused for a moment and turned to the tightly closed training room. "Look for this person." "Rex," Shirley leaned against the door and smiled patiently, "he's very reliable, don't be afraid." Tang An pursed her lips again and remained silent. Shirley was really troubled by this phenomenon. As long as this guy didn't receive the desired response, he would close his mouth and never speak again. But I couldn't tell her, it was because Rex, like this little guy, was a bit crazy that I pushed her over. It's really deadly. Shirley raised her eyebrows, straightened her reclined body, and coughed lightly. "All right, little one. I still have some work to do. Can you go in by yourself?" Tang An let out a and his gaze fell on the door handle of the training room. Shirley was a bit uneasy, but still didn't say anything. Her light green eyes stared at Tang An for a few seconds before turning around and walking away. Only Tang An stood alone in front of the training room door. Tang An hesitated for half a minute, reached out and grabbed the doorknob, then clicked and twisted it open. The door closed behind him, and Tang An was now on a relatively low platform. Tang An pursed his lips and took a few steps forward. The sound of punching came from the empty training ground. Tang An walked to the railing of the platform and looked down. There was really a tall man practicing boxing. The man was naked on his upper body, with slightly black skin. Sweat from his movements slid down his sturdy muscles, and his short black hair was soaked in sweat, flying up with the man's punching movements. The man's fists and feet are full of explosive power, and his muscles are tight, flowing and powerful, like a beautiful and fierce black panther. Tang An grabbed the railing with both hands, holding his breath. His black eyes stared straight at the man, as if holding back everything from the outside world. In his eyes, only the man's forceful arms, rhythmic muscles, and precise fists remained. A crazy obsession with power appeared on his face. Rex punched his last punch, the heavy sandbag swaying back and forth. He straightened up and glanced lightly at the little cub on the platform with his head turned to his side. Ice blue eyes collided into Tang An's pupils like this. Tang An's breathing immediately stopped, and his eyelashes trembled almost imperceptibly. Rex's ice blue eyes looked at her through sweaty black hair. Asians, ill-fitting T-shirts and sports pants, minor rib injuries, thin but muscular, strong waist and lower limbs, extremely vigilant. Tang An pursed his mouth tightly and looked at Rex with caution and vigilance, but Rex only glanced at her before moving his gaze and casually took a towel to wipe his sweat. Tang An's tense muscles relaxed slightly, and Tang An, whose nerves had just relaxed, did not notice Rex's next movements. With a soft, duh, sound, a tall body emitting heat and hormones appeared in front of Tang An. Tang An was surprised and looked up to see Rex's icy blue eyes. Rex leaped directly onto the railing supported by Dawn like a cheetah, crouched naked on top, and lowered his head to approach Dawn with wide-open eyes. The man's sturdy and tall body approached, and the sweat that had just finished exercising slid down the muscles in his neck and chest. The warm breath sprayed onto Tang An's side face as the man tilted his head. Tang An's pupils widened, and even his ears were filled with the powerful heartbeat of Rex constantly approaching. The overwhelming pressure made Tang An's body stiff and unable to move at all. Unable to move. Rex's scrutinizing gaze moved inch by inch from Tang An's side ears and shoulders, as if there was substance. Like a black panther crouching on a tree ambushing, arched its back, its gaze fixed on the prey's throat, its sharp teeth grinding. Tang An instinctively felt Rex's desire to hunt, and his face gradually cracked, like when he first arrived at Bourman. He crazily bared his snow-white teeth. Ha! Rex chuckled in her ear, and Dawn An's shoulder shook violently. Are you the new guy? Tang An stared straight at Rex's rolling Adam's apple as he spoke, like a schizophrenic, listening to his hoarse voice say, yes. Rex showed a contemptuous smile on his face, straightened up, and the oppressive hormone withdrew from Dawn's ear. Tang An's body suddenly relaxed from a highly tense state, and his eyes suddenly turned black. Tang An grabbed the railing tightly, preventing himself from kneeling on the ground in front of Rex. Rex jumped straight down from the platform railing, stood up and walked towards the shower, pointing to the nearby stool. Wait here, little devil, he said. Tang An watched as he entered the bathroom and stood in front of the platform for 5 minutes until the sound of water in the bathroom was about to stop. Tang An then made up his mind to control his instinctive urge to escape. Taking a deep breath, Tang An climbed up the railing like Rex, with a wide training ground at his feet. Losing the protection of the railing, everything below made Tang An slightly dizzy, but this crazy tension made every pore of Tang An open. I don't know if he was stimulated by Rex, but there was a voice in Tang An's mind that kept saying, jump down, jump down, jump down. So Tang An jumped. Jump up high, like a free bird. Rex came out of the bathroom wiping his hair and saw this scene. Tang An's eyes sparkled with madness and even excitement, jumping into the sky regardless of everything. After passing through a perfect parabola, he landed steadily and rolled up to stand up. The little one who got up turned his head and saw Rex. He immediately tightened his body and pursed his mouth as if facing a great enemy. Rex licked his teeth. In previous years, Rex had taken others with him, but almost all of them were in the stage of inspection, scaring away their prey. Shirley is right, crazy people really appreciate each other. From today until the end of the ring competition, I will be responsible for training you. Rex took 2 steps over and stood in front of Tang An. What's the problem? No, sir. Okay, let's answer a few questions. Rex narrowed his eyes dangerously. Can you fight, kid? Yes. Rex licked his teeth and nodded, asking the second question. Have you ever killed anyone? Tang An's originally calm expression showed a hint of hesitation, as if he wanted to admit it, but was also hesitant about something. Do you have it or not? Rex squinted his eyes and spoke in a slow and oppressive tone. Yes. Tang An slowly spoke, his throat twitched, his gaze lowered to the ground, and he added, but I don't remember. Rex moved his neck with a clattering sound, reached out a hand to grab Tang An's chin, and forcefully lifted Tang An's face, forcing her to look into his own eyes. "Listen, little devil, I don't care about your trouble." Rex squinted his ice-blue eyes and approached, with a cruel smile on his lips. "But I don't need a useless person who can't even kill." Tang An held her breath, and the strength of Rex's hands made her jaw tingle. "Yes, sir." "Very good." Rex let go and straightened up, glaring at Don, giving the first command. "Now, use all your strength to knock me down." Tang An stood still, his dark eyes fixed on Rex. Rex's eyes showed impatience, and his tongue pressed against his cheeks as he was about to repeat it. However, he saw Tang An turn his questioning gaze towards the long and short knives on the side. Rex glanced at him and said, "No kid, it can't be used." Before he could finish speaking, a shadow flashed past and a powerful punch hit Rex's face fiercely. Bang! This punch hit Rex's palm. Rex clenched his 5 fingers, and Tang An's other hand immediately clenched Rex's fist in pain, causing his arm to tremble. Rex let go of his hand, and before Tang An could hold on to his injured arm, Rex's punch had already hit her lower abdomen. Cough, Tang An's body flew out directly, rolled a few times, then stopped and lay on the ground in embarrassment. Rex looked at Tang An struggling to get up, then lowered his head to look at his palm, which had turned blue from her slap, and licked his teeth. Originally, the action just now was to divert one's gaze. Rex's eyes flashed with a hint of madness, like a black panther encountering prey, and his neck tilted excitedly. On the 5th day, Big Boss. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Burman Racecourse. A few motorcycles whizzed past the track like arrows from the strings, and the brand new Harley led the way, drifting gracefully, far behind the relentless pursuit of other motorcycles. Harley roared through the bend, his speed not slowing down, like a loaded bullet, heading straight towards the finish line. Shirley! 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 The crowd on both sides of the track waved their arms and cheered wildly. Harley, who had crossed the finish line, made a big drift and came to a stop. Shirley's long legs supported the body of the car, took off her helmet, and a head of silver curly hair flowed smoothly over her shoulders. The second-placed motorcycle immediately arrived and drifted to a stop in front of Shirley. "Damn it, bitch," the motorcycle rider wearing a helmet tilted his head at Sherry, "go to hell." Shirley curled her lips, reached out to flick her silver hair on her forehead, squinted her eyes, and blew a proud whistle. The motorcycle rider spat and stepped off the motorcycle, taking off his helmet and leaving. Burman's racing has always been closely related to gambling. People place bets on the person who is most likely to win, and the more bets they have, the more money they can earn in a race. But since Sherry participated in the competition, no one has been able to shake her first-place position. Everyone's bets were placed on Shirley, who refused to come and amassed wealth in this way. The motorcycle riders were itching with hatred, but there was nothing they could do about Sherry. Shirley got off the track and just lit a lady's cigarette when a panicked white man ran towards her. "Shirley! What's wrong, Sisev?" Sisev ran out of breath and handed her the phone, saying, "Big Boss. Big Boss has an accident." Shirley's eyebrows and eyes furrowed as she took her phone and flipped down. The page displayed this morning's news. Sisev looked nervously into Shirley's obscure eyes. After all, Shirley was recommended by the Big Boss back then, and has been on the safe side ever since. Many people suspected that Shirley had an affair with the Big Boss. Shirley pinched the cigarette she was lighting and threw her phone back into Heathcliff's arms. "Gather manpower and go to the Northern District." A dilapidated steel factory on Shriek Street in the North 2nd District. The rolling shutter door of the steel plant was tightly closed, sinking in the middle as if someone had punched it. Moonlight shone through the narrow window, shining on the steel bars in all directions. With a loud bang, the heavy rolling shutter door was pulled up by someone. A tall and sturdy man stood against the moonlight, holding the rolling shutter door with one hand. "Boss, it's done." The tall man faced the dark path inside the steel factory. Another man's deep voice came from the darkness. With a click, the faint light of the lighter lit up in the darkness, approaching the cigarette in the man's mouth and illuminating the lower half of his face. A clear and firm jaw, with a slight stubble, and a pair of snake-like golden eyes in the shadow, instantly illuminated by this cluster of flames. Only flickering in the darkness for a moment, this oppressive gaze disappeared with the extinguishing of the lighter flame. Only a spark of cigarette burning remains, clearly extinguished in the darkness. With a flick of the man's finger, more than half of the remaining cigarette fell from his fingertips. "Call out." At the moment the cigarette landed, the gasoline on the ground was ignited with a whoosh, and the flames spread wildly, plunging the once dark steel plant into a sea of flames. The flames illuminated the tall man standing in the midst of the flames with both hands in his pockets, as well as the body of the man lying on the ground, killed by a single shot. There was a bullet hole in the center of the corpse's eyebrows, and the frozen muscles on his face were shocked and angry. Blood splattered on the wall pillar behind him, being licked by flames. The man has a tall figure, wide shoulders and narrow waist, with both hands inserted into the pockets of his windbreaker. The black collar of the windbreaker is tied up, which can cover the man's chin. The man stood at the feet of the corpse, looking coldly down. His golden eyes were scorched by the flames, and his expression became even colder due to the flickering flames. "Boss!" The man carrying the rolling shutter door let out a cry. The man surrounded by the flames turned his head slightly and glanced at the door lukewarm. The man holding up the rolling shutter door with a tall horse shrank his neck. The flames had already begun to climb towards the man, who calmly brushed off his jumping tongue and walked towards the direction of the rolling shutter door. Leather shoes stepped on the cement floor outside the steel factory, and the rolling shutter door was slammed down, instantly isolating the scorching flames behind the man. The man raised his hand and patted the neck of his subordinate, glanced at him, and then pulled out a new cigarette for himself, holding it in his mouth. "Let's shout, let's fart." The subordinate rubbed his back neck, but dared not shout for pain. "Boss, the police are coming." That group of violent groups called the police. As soon as he finished speaking, as if to confirm his words, there was indeed a sharp siren sound in the distance, mixed with the roar of motorcycles. The man let out a and walked to the roadside with his long legs. He picked up a Harley hidden in the grass with one hand, smoking a cigarette. One person, one motorcycle, and the two quickly left the scene. A few hours later, the fire at the steel plant was extinguished. Before Shirley could even change off her motorcycle uniform, she leaned against her Harley and patiently accepted the police's questioning. Sisev was also there, trembling with fear at the sight of so many police officers. The poor answer extended the interrogation by half an hour. After dismissing the police, Shirley stood up from the motorcycle and ignored Sisev. She walked straight with her long legs, lowered her head to avoid the burnt black rolling shutter door, and walked into the steel plant. Sisev walked in with Shirley. The steel plant is now scorched black and dripping with water due to being heavily doused by the fire water gun. The body was taken away by the police. What should we do? Sisev avoided the puddle on the ground and followed Shirley to stand in front of a charred wall pillar. The ground in front of the wall pillars was the place where the corpse had been lying, and it was now burnt black. Shirley glanced around, her light green eyes narrowed slightly, squatting down and reaching out to pick up the cigarette on the ground. The cigarette is the ignition point and is basically completely burnt, but upon closer inspection, the tooth marks on the cigarette butt can still be vaguely recognized. Shirley twisted the cigarette butt in her hand, and the charred cigarette rolled down from the front. It is clearly a cigarette butt of a young man. Putting things in a transparent bag, Shirley stepped over the puddle and touched the charred wall pillars. The blood had turned into uneven black charcoal, and Shirley's pale green pupils moved slightly. After a moment of silence, she withdrew her hand and patted the dirty dust on it. Sisev carefully huddled to one side, observing Shirley's expression, wisely remaining silent, afraid of touching her mold. A sudden ringing of the phone broke the silence, and Sisev was so frightened that he almost jumped up. Shirley took out her phone and glanced at the number, with a slightly serious expression on her face. The bell rang hysterically, and Shirley picked up the phone. Across from her came a series of roars mixed with French, with a sharp alarm sound in the background. Sisev couldn't understand what the other person was saying, but the sound of the alarm alone had already frightened him and made his face turn pale. Fight, did it start? Shirley took away her phone. The people in the East 2nd District have caused a little trouble for our steel factory. Shirley raised her eyebrows and gestured for the motorcycles outside, asking nearby brothers to bring in a few. East District. Little boss's people. Who else can there be? Shirley shrugged her shoulders and, as she spoke, pulled up a handful of silver hair, tying up her beautiful curls and revealing her slender neck. Sisev saw Shirley systematically inspecting her equipment, wristbands, boots, and pistols, and finally realized something. Incredibly, he asked, "Shirley, are you going in person?" "Of course." Shirley let go of her hand and curled her lips with a smile. Even a simple gesture seemed charming. "What about Burman?" "They won't touch Burman." Shirley put on her helmet, crossed her long legs onto her Harley, and with only one sentence left for Heathcliff, she swept away. The industries in the East 2nd District and West 2nd District have always been under the jurisdiction of the big boss, with Shirley in charge of the West 2nd District and Lewis in charge of the East 2nd District. Although there has been friction between them for a long time, they are still unwilling to cause trouble due to the obscene power of the big boss. As for Burman, the entire neighborhood of Burman is a gathering place for mafia, street violence groups, and other people, with countless illegal industries that make money. Various forces are mixed in, and even wealthy businessmen have to get involved. Therefore, although located in the South End, the Burman neighborhood is the center of the entire London underworld cesspool. In this situation, Lewis would not rashly move Bourman. The motorcycle ran at lightning speed all the way, roaring through the block. The tail lights flashed a bright and dazzling red light in the darkness, and the silver hair exposed outside the helmet rose in the wind. The faint sound of gunfire had already been heard, and Shirley's eyebrows and eyes furrowed. Several motorcycles chased after her from behind, driving alongside her. A motorcycle approached Sherry, and under the helmet came Jason's suppressed angry voice. "We called back over there, we didn't catch anyone." Jason cursed, mixed in Spanish, and the roar of his motorcycle overshadowed his insults. It was those violent groups who reported to the police. Damn it. Violent groups. Shirley squinted her pale green eyes and didn't say anything. She raised her hand and gestured to Jason and the others, causing several motorcycles to slow down and slowly disperse. The gunfire of two groups of people fighting was mixed with the roar of motorcycles. Sherry made a clean bend and turned the street corner. The light from the gunpowder exploded like firecrackers, flickering continuously in the dark night, becoming more and more dazzling. A smoke bomb exploded on the street, and the smoke immediately blocked the view. Sparks erupted from the muzzle of the mafia. An Irish man carrying a machine gun stood on the second floor, shooting towards the street. The iron bucket and brick wall on the opposite side were hit with a crackling sound, and brick shavings and iron sheets were mixed with bullets flying around. Shirley jumped out of the car, rolled on the spot, deftly pulled out her gun, and rolled behind a pile of iron drums, allowing the Harley to crash into a utility pole and be scrapped. A string of bullets swept past the iron barrel behind Sherry, and she threw away her helmet. She loaded the pistol in her hand, with a calm and dangerous expression in her eyes. The bullets shot past, and Sherry turned around to lift the muzzle. The man immediately noticed that the machine gun had not yet been aimed, and Sherry's bullets had already been loaded. Bang! The incessant sound of machine gun fire suddenly came to an end, and the man's head was pierced by bullets. The machine gun slipped from his hand and, accompanied by the sound of gunfire, hit the ground. Bang bang bang. Gunshots rang on the left, and Sherry quickly crouched down. The shrapnel flew off the metal sheet, emitting dazzling sparks that brushed against Sherry's silver hair and flew out. Bang. A motorcycle speeding from another street knocked down the shooting man with the sound of a gun. Johnson drifted to the brakes, holding the dead man's collar in his hand. On the sixth day, the muzzle of the gun. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. De co lois ara trong quatrin lay text. On the seventh day, Andrew. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Bang. The explosion echoed through the entire East End, and Lewis's men engaged in 3 fierce battles with Johnson and the others in one night. Each time, the firepower was strong, and in the end, Rex led his men to blow up the chemical plant in the East End, which restrained the crazy counterattacks of the East End people. But there is no doubt that as soon as Lewis took office, the entire Bullman red light district was assigned to a mercenary assassin under his command, Andrew. Shirley's position is unstable, and the people under her command are beginning to waver. The power order established over the years is in jeopardy. But fortunately, Louis was the youngest son adopted by the big boss in France. When the big boss died, all 3 of his sons were unwilling to accept it, and Louis was still unable to submit to the crowd. This thrilling night has passed, and the entire Bourman is in crisis. People are waiting to see Sherry or Andrew's jokes. They don't care who wins or loses, as long as they have fun watching. Burman will always be a fantastic and lascivious place. They are eager for death. At this moment, Shirley, who was at the forefront of public opinion, was leaning against the door frame of the medical room, holding a cigarette and flipping through her phone. The page displays Andrew's personal information. A former mercenary with astonishing physical fitness and combat experience, he is a fairly good assassin, both in terms of various physical fitness data in reports and military achievements. Shirley flipped down and accidentally squinted her eyes. Surprisingly, there is not a photo of himself. But Sherry guessed that he was probably a tall man with a cut. After all, mercenaries are of this standard. Just as she was thinking about it, an Irish woman walked towards her. As soon as Shirley lifted her head, a letter slipped under her nose. Shirley extinguished her phone, raised her eyebrows, and took the letter from the Irish woman's hand. "What's up, dear?" The little boss said, "Please complete the handover of Burman as soon as possible." The Irish woman's eyebrows and eyes showed impatience and a hint of disdain. Shirley's pale green eyes looked straight at the small eyes of the Irish woman with thick eyeshadow. The woman straightened her back, opened her mouth, but said nothing. After all, her courage is limited to that. Shirley curled her lips and lazily straightened her body against the door, saying, "Okay, I got it." The Irish woman probably wanted to spit at her, but she moved her lips and, under the pressure of Shirley's gaze, turned her head and walked away. Shirley squinted her eyes, reached out, shook off the letter, and looked at it in 10 lines. The general idea is that Shirley needs to hand over the operation of the Bullman red light area to Andrew, who will take over, but as for when it will be as soon as possible, the letter does not say. Shirley lit the letter with a cigarette, and the flames engulfed it, gradually burning into ashes. As she saw only a small corner of the letter burning, Shirley raised her hand and grasped the flames in her hand. Shirley only spent 3 days compiling all the data on Burman's current personnel. After all, it was not a difficult task for Shirley. From the moment she took office, she was always prepared for the collapse of the big boss. It is estimated that Andrew arrived at the red light area of Burman and arranged for someone to take him for a few days to repair. Shirley kept the records and gave a message to Andrew's deputy, who agreed to meet at the bar. But when Shirley went to the appointment, Andrew didn't even show up. Shirley made 3 consecutive appointments with Andrew, and all 3 times she was stood up. This matter quickly spread, and people under Burman's command were vaguely discussing, saying that Burman West was about to lose power, and many even openly defected to Lewis. At this moment, Shirley is comfortably drinking red wine in her villa in downtown London, without much concern for Burman's affairs. She had no intention of taking control of the situation from the beginning. After all, she was also very interested in the dispute between the big boss and Lewis. Like the people of Burman, Shirley eagerly awaited the next thing, waiting for the so-called former mercenary. Andrew. After being rejected 3 times, Shirley no longer took the initiative to bring up the handover matter. On the one hand, she stayed at the villa to rest, and on the other hand, she assisted Rex Johnson in the finishing work after the fight, until a week later Andrew took the initiative to send someone over. Andrew's deputy told Sherry that the meeting was scheduled at a high-end hotel in downtown London. That evening, Andrew's deputy sent someone to pick up Shirley and drove the car directly into the courtyard of the hotel. The hotels in the city have a medieval style, and the record player in the lobby on the first floor plays Vienna Forest. White people hold beautiful women and dance elegant waltzes. Shirley was wearing high heels and a burgundy dress, creating an incredibly sexy contrast with her fair neck and thighs. A cross pendant was hanging around the slender neck, just vaguely resting on the chest. Shirley stood on the side staircase, slightly tilting her head and looking down at the elegant dance floor below. She still likes the absurd and bold Burman. After the hotel staff told her the room number, Sherry left. She walked through the narrow corridor and stopped at the door. She raised her hand and was about to knock on the door when she heard a lewd sound coming from the room. The female voice is sticky, while the male voice is hoarse, which can be seen everywhere in the Bourman Bar. Shirley curled her lips and put down her hand that was about to knock on the door. She first confirmed the room number with the lobby manager, and then sat on a bench in the hallway, straightening her long legs and waiting while looking at her phone. About half an hour later, the sound inside gradually subsided. Shirley patiently waited for a while, estimating that the two had almost finished taking a shower before standing up and knocking on the door. The door opened, and heat and fragrance rushed towards him. A tall, slightly black-skinned man stood at the door, holding onto the door frame and unbuttoning his shirt, extending all the way to his chest. "Who are you looking for?" The man was smoking and squinted his eyes dangerously. "I'm looking for Andrew," Shirley smiled. "That's it, sir." The man chuckled recklessly and hugged the beautiful woman in the room just now. The woman leaned in and looked at Shirley with provocative eyes. "No, no," Shirley smiled and raised her phone, which displayed the man's personal information page. "Mercenary Chris, I think I know you." "You." Chris never expected such a development and couldn't say a word for a moment. "I'm sorry, Mercenary Chris." Shirley put away her phone, hugged her chest with both hands, and her light green eyes narrowed slightly with a smile like a feline. "I'm looking for your boss, Andrew." Chris's Adam's apple rolled a little, and the woman in his arms couldn't help but restrain her expression when she saw Chris not speaking. "Tisk, Chris." A lazy male voice sounded not far away, and the sound of leather shoes stepping on the floor approached. Shirley turned around and a tall and sturdy figure appeared in front of her. Shirley's light green eyes moved. The man in front of him had a slightly black skin, a sharp cut, a string of letters engraved on the right side of his short and fragmented black hair, a wide shoulder and narrow waist, and a sturdy and tall figure, casting an aggressive shadow in front of Sherry. The man was wearing a suit shirt, with the collar buttons wide open. The suit sleeves were rolled up, revealing a sturdy and powerful forearm. The black cuffs and a straight tie outlined the man's perfect muscles. The most deadly thing is that this guy has a pair of lion-like golden eyes, squinting slightly, with thin lips hooked, and looking down at Sherry in danger. "Mr. Andrew, nice to meet you." Shirley didn't reach out, just smiled and said hello, because Andrew's hands were in his pockets, and Shirley didn't think he meant to shake hands with her. Nice to meet you." Andrew raised his eyebrows, tilted his neck, and then turned his gaze to Chris inside the door. The woman in Chris's arms was so scared that she hid in the private room. Chris stood up straight under Andrew's gaze and said, "Boss." "I don't know, my name works so well," Andrew said with a slight curl in his mouth, one hand in his pocket, and the other hand directly over Shirley, brushing Chris's open collar with 2 fingers. The chest in front of her approached slightly, and a faint tobacco scent penetrated Shirley's nose. Andrew still had a smile on his lips, but Chris immediately restrained his arrogant expression and stood up straight with his shirt folded. "Boss, I..." Andrew stopped Chris from talking nonsense and then lowered his head and waved his hand, gesturing for him to take someone off. Chris dared not talk nonsense and pulled the disheveled woman out of the private room without any clothes on. He hurriedly left without daring to say a word. Bombed away Chris, Andrew tilted his head, raised an eyebrow, and turned to Shirley on the side. Shirley was originally looking at Andrew's face with great interest, and Andrew's gaze shifted. The two of them suddenly met. Shirley held her chin with one hand, lifting one eyebrow with curved eyes. Her seductive light green eyes carried a hint of mockery. Andrew raised his eyebrows with great interest, squinted his eyes, and slowly shifted his gaze from Shirley's eyes to her beautiful lips, stopping on them. A simple glance made by Andrew, like a lion conquering a city, undoubtedly carries a strong sense of oppression and hormones. Shirley breathed a faint scream, and the strong aggression brought by such a simple action surprised herself. This is really rare. After all, there were very few people in Burman who could make Shirley feel oppressed. Coincidentally, Shirley has never been afraid of such aggressive gazes. She arched her eyebrows and leaned down slightly with her hand behind her, aligning her beautiful eyes with Andrew's gaze. "I'm here to complete the handover work, Mr. Andrew." "I don't need that kind of thing," Andrew shrugged, raised his eyebrows, and looked straight into Shirley's clear and dangerous light eyes. "The letter was sent to you by the young master." "Oh." Shirley's eyes curved like a cunning big cat, "So why did you call me here today?" "You are the person in charge." Andrew's golden pupils narrowed slightly, reflecting Shirley's perfect chest and waistline. However, there was a hypocritical and lazy gentleman's smile on the corner of his lips. "I think I should entertain you." "Ah, this angle is really his mother good." Shirley's eyes curled up, for some reason, and she vaguely felt an aggressive desire hidden beneath her casual and lazy golden pupils. However, in just an instant, this feeling disappeared. However, Shirley has always believed in her instincts, or rather her sixth sense. With her finger resting on her chin, Shirley raised a slender eyebrow and smiled. "Mr. Andrew seems to be very interested in me as the person in charge." Andrew pressed his tongue against his back teeth, then smiled and lowered his eyelashes, silently agreeing to Shirley's boasting. With his hands in his pockets, Andrew was slightly attached, his tall nose bridge approaching Shirley, and his thin lips almost pressed against her cheek. Shirley's ears were tinged with the heat of Andrew's breath, and the pleasant smell of tobacco accompanied by hormones lingered around Shirley's neck. "Wow, the body is really his mother great." Shirley's gaze fell eagerly on Andrew's open collar. Andrew took a deep breath of Shirley's perfume, and a lazy and sincere voice sounded in Shirley's ear. "I think nobody doesn't care about you here." Shirley curved her cat-like eyes, shrugged her shoulders, and said in a regretful tone, "Mr. Andrew, I like more explicit compliments." Andrew chuckled softly, and a warm masculine aura sprayed onto Shirley's neck and ears with the laughter. Having laughed enough, Andrew straightened up, his eyelashes slightly drooped, and his gaze turned to the cross pressed against Shirley's chest. His golden eyes had a hint of mockery in them. "Do killers also believe in God?" Of course, Shirley curled her lips and smiled, lifting the cross with her index finger and shaking it. "Every time I say, 'God bless me,' before shooting." Andrew seemed to be amused, shrugged his shoulders and laughed. After laughing enough, Andrew took a step back to show Shirley the way, turned around to signal Shirley, and followed him to the restaurant. Shirley looked at Andrew walking in front of her, blinked her eyes like a cunning cat, and whistled. What does Mr. Andrew think of the perfume of Penhalions? Andrew didn't look back and casually waved his hand. A magnetic, low-pitched voice came from the front. Not bad, it suits my taste. On the 8th day, Lauren. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. When Shirley returned from the city, it was already the morning of the 2nd day. Andrew personally drove the Wrangler to see Shirley back to the Bourman Bar. Shirley didn't want to reveal her address, so she didn't go back to her villa in downtown London. After the car came to a steady stop, Shirley got off the car, flicked her hair, and her high heels made a crisp sound on the ground. Andrew didn't enter the bar and lazily leaned on the seat, half his arm resting on the lowered car window. The smoke from his fingertips drifted out with the wind, emitting white smoke. Sherry, bang bang, tapped on his car body and signaled with a smile that she was leaving. Mr. Andrew, see you later. See you later. Andrew raised his eyebrows, nodded casually at her, held the cigarette in his mouth, and immediately lifted the car window without hesitation. He stepped on the gas pedal and drove the powerful Wrangler away. Shirley raised her eyebrows with great interest. Entering the bar, the atmosphere inside was quite subtle, especially the men on the dance floor. The gaze gathered on Shirley with naked enthusiasm and desire. Shirley hooked her lips and walked through the men and women, taking off the cross pendant she was decorating and casually throwing it to the guitarist on the side. The dance floor was like dropping a bomb, immediately boiling up. People were laughing loudly, and Shirley threw away those deafening teasing and vulgar words, humming Vienna Forest, back to her room. Sherry's charm has always been like this, regardless of her power or status. Shirley's room is on the 2nd floor, equipped with dormitories for the thugs. Stretching lazily, Shirley took off her front and back curved dress and bra patch and threw them aside. She kicked off her high heels, untied her hair, and walked barefoot towards the bathroom. The bright sunlight hit Shirley, outlining a perfectly plump curve, and her skin was translucent white. Turn on the shower switch, and the warm water flow surrounds Shirley. Shirley squints contentedly, like a satisfied snow leopard. I haven't seen the little one for a long time, Shirley said to herself while washing her hair. At this moment, Tang An, who was being nagged, turned his head and dodged Rex's punch, then swung it out and was firmly caught by Rex again. Rex waved his hand, and Tang An flew out directly. He rolled on the ground and immediately flipped over again. The run, up and jump were like a flying kick. Rex dodged backwards, but Tang An exerted too much force and kicked out, losing his center of gravity and falling to the ground. The fall was quite heavy, and Tang An rolled a few times before stopping, taking a deep breath in pain. Tisk, Rex impatiently kicked her with the tip of his shoe, causing Tang An, who was about to get up, to lie on the ground. You're the one, go sell it as soon as possible. Tang An lay on his back, with a pair of dark eyes staring at Rex. Sweat from his cheeks flowed down his hair into the dirty collar. Kid, are you still fighting or not? Rex bared his pale teeth at her. Strike. Tang An jumped up from the ground with a horizontal shovel and was easily dodged by Rex. Taking advantage of the situation, Tang An jumped up without hesitation and launched a counterattack. Rex grinned and swung his fist back. Even though it was training, he showed no mercy in his punches. Tang An was hit a few more times, although he pursed his mouth and remained focused without saying a word. His reaction speed gradually slowed down, and his arms trembled due to too much attack. Pop. Rex caught Tang An's weak punch again and pinched his 5 fingers slightly. Tang An frowned in pain, and his arms trembled even more violently. The whole fist was convulsing in Rex's palm. Rex let go, and Tang An immediately withdrew his hand and swiftly put it in a defensive position, his black eyes fixed on Rex. Rex ignored her, straightened up, turned around and walked to the front shelf. He drew 2 bottles of water from a nearby shelf and threw one to Tang An. Tang An caught it and looked at Rex with water. Give you 5 minutes, finish drinking and continue playing. Rex's blue eyes glanced at Donnan, with one hand in his pocket and the other unscrewing the cap of the mineral water bottle, taking a slow sip. Tang An was already thirsty, and his thirsty throat rolled a little. He opened the bottle cap and immediately took a few big sips. He drank too quickly, so much so that water droplets flowed into his clothes along the rolling throat. Half a bottle of water was quickly gulped down. Tang An breathed a sigh of satisfaction and sat on the ground with his hands propped up, ignoring his image. He drank the remaining half bottle of water in one gulp. Tang An licked his lips with a lingering desire and pinched the empty mineral water bottle. Staring at the empty bottle, Tang An was lost in thought. A cold object pressed against his cheek, and he was startled. He immediately shrank his neck to avoid it. Turning around, it was Rex's leftover water. Rex's blue eyes narrowed, and he casually threw the mineral water bottle into Tang An's arms, kicking Tang An on the ground. "Little ghost, hurry up and drink it. After drinking, continue fighting." Tang An's black eyes were fixed on Rex, as if he wanted to see something on his face. Rex also looked straight at her, sneered, and his icy blue eyes approached with a hint of cruelty. "Have you rested enough? Do you want to continue?" Tang An immediately averted his gaze and drank the half bottle of water given by Rex to the fullest, finally relieving his thirsty and smoking throat. Without a word of unnecessary nonsense, Tang An quickly got up after drinking and wiped the water off his face with his hand. Rex squinted his eyes and looked at Don's trembling forearm in his sleeve. He pressed his tongue against his cheek, but before he could say anything, he was interrupted by a pleasant voice. "Lex, how's the little guy doing?" Upon hearing this sound, Tang An's eyes widened slightly and he looked up at the platform. Shirley changed into a capable tight-fitting outfit, with silver curly hair tied high behind her head. Her arms gently rested on the railing of the platform, and she leaned down slightly, squeezing Tang An's eyes as she looked over. Rex licked his teeth with his tongue and casually lifted his chin towards Don, then took a step back with his hands in his pockets, leaving room for Shirley to talk. Shirley bent her eyes and said, "How do you feel, little one?" Tang An's black and bright eyes stared straight at Shirley, with a serious expression on his face, as if pondering how to answer her question. Stupid, Rex closed his ice-blue eyes and tilted his head to move the stiff muscles around his neck, answering for her. "But there's progress." Tang An gave Rex a quick glance and was surprised by his rare praise. "Oh. Really? That's really great." Shirley smiled and held on to her cheeks. Rex raised an eyebrow and casually reached out to pinch Tang An's neck, scrutinizing his spine from top to bottom. "To be honest, Shirley, your decision is not wise at all." Tang An was pinched by his neck, his body stiff and unable to move. He only heard Rex's cruel voice behind his ear. "If I had to tell you, throw it to that old Japanese businessman. He must like it." Shirley still held her cheeks, raised her eyebrows, and cast an interested gaze on the little one who was frozen there without saying a word, hoping to find any expression of fear on her face. But she failed. The little one was forced to pinch his neck and stare at her, his dark eyes a bit cramped and stiff, but he was not afraid. "Interesting proposal, little one." Shirley cunningly curved her light green eyes and curled the corners of her mouth. "What do you think?" Tang An looked straight into Shirley's eyes, moved his lips, and instinctively let out a "K" breath before immediately pursing his lips. Rex understood and grinned. "Kill him." "How do you kill him?" "Bite his thing off." Tang An pursed his lips and remained silent, allowing Rex to shake himself by pinching the back of his neck. "Not talking again, this habit is really terrible." Shirley couldn't help but rub her eyebrows, slightly bow down, and a helpless smile appeared on her face. "Rex, you've worked so hard." Rex sneered coldly and said, "You're welcome." He released his hand that was pinching the back of Don An's neck and said, "How's it going?" "On the Watanabe side, consider it." "Forget it, dear," Shirley shrugged her shoulders exaggeratedly and smiled helplessly. "Even if we really bite off that guy, it would be a big trouble for us." Rex impatiently clicked and inserted his hand into his pocket. As soon as he finished speaking, he could only hear the urgent footsteps outside the training ground. The door was pushed open and Will burst in, panting heavily. Seeing Shirley, Will's face showed a relieved expression as he gasped for breath. "Shirley. You all are here. Great. What's wrong?" Shirley supported Will's heaving shoulders. Lauren is addicted." Will took a breath and pointed to the door. "Jason is stopping him. Hurry." Shirley and Rex immediately exchanged a glance, and their expressions became a bit serious. Without saying a word, they snatched each other out. Shirley ran ahead, her eyebrows calm, her light green eyes slightly narrowed, adding a touch of calmness and killing intent. "Will, did you notify anyone else?" "I'm notifying you. This time is full of customers. The thugs are all so busy." Rex followed closely behind, furrowed his brows, and cursed, it would really cause trouble. Tang An also ran out of the training ground and ran up the second-floor stairs to look down. There was already a mess around the bar below. A tall white man rampaged forward and forth, with a terrifying roar in his throat like a wild beast. His strength was so strong that even the equally tall Johnson couldn't hold him down. The women screamed as they retreated, and even some men dared not approach the insane Lauren. Tang An recognized at a glance that he was the white man who had questioned him with a gun that day. Lauren screamed and broke free from Jensen, rushing towards the crowd. The people screamed and retreated, while Shirley jumped onto the table and jumped over the people's heads. She landed straight and punched Lauren twice, causing her nosebleed to sore. Most people can't handle Shirley's 2 punches, but Lauren seems to no longer feel the pain. With blood streaming down her face, she hugged Shirley's waist and frantically bumped into the wall. Shirley was covered in blood from the impact, squinting her eyes and repeatedly hitting Lauren's spine with her elbow. Lauren let out a hee-hee sound in his throat, taking a step back and wanting to collide again. Rexler, who had been rushed, pulled his neck apart desperately. "Damn it. A sedative." Rex gritted his teeth and trapped Lauren, who was struggling and roaring, "Call Melissa." Someone panicked and agreed, frantically tapping the walkie-talkie and shouting loudly for Melissa. Tang An was mesmerized, his black eyes wide open, reflecting the chaotic scene below. His hand gripping the railing trembled slightly, and his breathing became increasingly rapid. Jason, who had just been beaten, rushed forward and grabbed Lauren, who was struggling and roaring, along with Rex. The two of them stumbled and finally pressed Lauren to the ground, only to be forcefully lifted away by Lauren. Jensen was thrown to the ground, Lauren roared and rushed towards him. Sherry swung the chair near the bar and hit him with a loud bang, causing his head to break and blood to flow. Unexpectedly, Lauren, who had gone crazy, didn't stop at all. With his head emitting blood, he bit Jason's neck in one bite. Ah. Day 9 Black House. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ah. Jensen's scream startled Tang An, and his eyes regained their consciousness from the previous obsession. Tang An suddenly turned her head to look at the training room on the second floor, squinting her eyes and breathing rapidly. She remembered that Rex had a gun there. Jensen's screams continued below, and Rex grabbed Lauren's neck and pulled it outward, but Lauren's teeth had already stiffened, and Rex dared not exert any force. "Melissa. Haven't you arrived yet?" Shirley frowned and sternly scolded, waving her hand to send someone up to find Melissa. As soon as the words fell, with a loud bang, Lauren's chest burst into a blood flower. The women screamed, and the crowd immediately became chaotic, retreating and advancing. In the chaos, only Shirley and a few others stiffened in an instant. Who fired the gun? Rex looked up and saw Tang An holding a pistol in both hands, with wide eyes and a slight gasp for breath. "Damn it. Bastard." Rex's blood was almost flowing backwards, his icy blue eyes glaring angrily at Tang An, and he shouted sternly, "Put down the gun." Tang An's black eyes stared straight down, and the smell of gunpowder still permeated the muzzle, stimulating Tang An's nerves. "Tang An." Even Shirley didn't call out, "Little guy," and said in a strong tone, "Put down the gun and be obedient." Jason covered his neck and kicked Lauren away, panting heavily as he looked towards Tang An on the second floor. The expressions of the three people were extremely subtle. Tang An's eyes were still fixed on Lauren, who was lying on the ground. The shot did not hit Lauren's heart, and Tang An only had this sentence in his mind. "Do you hear me? Put down the gun." As if provoking Rex, Tang An fired again with a bang, the bullet piercing through his heart and nailing the trembling Lauren to the ground. "Bastard!" Rex gritted his teeth and directly pushed away the crowd, charging towards Tang An with a fierce expression on his face. Shirley glanced at the angry Rex and ignored him. She shouted to Will and a young boy to maintain order, and then reached out to help Johnson up from the ground. "Is it okay?" Jason gritted his teeth and shook his head, covering his neck as he turned his gaze to Tang An, who was still standing still. "What the hell is that?" When Rex rushed upstairs with a terrifying low pressure, Tang An turned his head and his dark eyes stared at Rex angrily rushing towards him. Still holding a gun in hand, motionless. "Damn it!" Rex snatched the gun away and slapped it in the face. With a loud bang, Tang An's figure shook and blood immediately flowed from the corner of his mouth. "Are you crazy? Shoot here." Rex gritted his teeth and picked up Tang An's collar. His icy blue eyes approached him and angrily lowered his voice. "Do you believe that I'll send you to that old guy at Watanabe's bed tomorrow?" Tang An clenched his wrists with both hands, his eyes fixed on Rex's angry blue eyes, pursed the bleeding corners of his mouth, and didn't say a word. And in the chaotic downstairs, a few thugs and Melissa hurriedly arrived. "What's going on?" Melissa's eyebrows stood on end and she sternly scolded. "Lauren is dead." Shirley squinted her eyes as she looked at Melissa's unattractive expression. "Darling, you're late. What are you calling me to do when everyone is dead?" Shirley shrugged her shoulders and gestured to Lauren, who was lying in a pool of blood. "I was originally planning to call you for a sedative, but now I'm fine," she said. "Who fired the gun?" Melissa couldn't help but frown. "You're really crazy." Shirley leaned over and patted Melissa's shoulder, gesturing to Lauren on the ground with a smile. "Darling, he's crazy. Can you help me see what's going on?" "It must be a drug addiction." Melissa frowned and made a reluctant gesture to the two thugs. "Damn it, lift it away." Shirley looked at Lauren's bloody body and couldn't help but squint her pale green eyes. She leaned against the table with her hands clasped around her chest, lost in thought. Rex looked at Tang An as he remained silent, his face gloomy, his tongue pressed against his cheek, and he nodded. He lifted Tang An up by her collar and dragged him towards the small black room at the end of the second-floor corridor. Tang An lifted his feet off the ground, immediately widened his black eyes, and struggled with his legs. His hands clenched Rex's fists, which were holding his collar, and he clenched his fingers like iron pliers. Rex remained unmoved, and with a brush sound, he opened the door of the small black room and calmly threw Tang An inside. Tang An was thrown to the ground and immediately got up, rushing towards the door. The iron door slammed shut, and Tang An collided directly with it. Tang An wiped his nose and swung his fist to smash the door with a clang-clang sound. "Lex!" There was no response outside the door, so Tang An stopped smashing it and stared silently at the iron door. After a while, Tang An lowered his eyes and turned to look at the cramped room. "It's just a small confinement room, with dried blood stains on the ground. It was left either during the production or during the fight." Tang An leaned against the wall and sat on the blood-stained ground, his eyes shining brightly in the black room, staring straight at the tightly closed iron door. Rex actually didn't leave, just standing at the door. When Donnie called out his name, Rex's furrowed eyebrows trembled. Shirley walked slowly over, Rex leaning against the wall, his face gloomy as he wiped the gun with his clothes, especially the fingerprints on the handle. Seeing Shirley coming over, Rex straightened up, his ugly expression slightly relieved, and raised his right eyebrow to signal the tightly closed confinement room. Shirley curved her eyebrows and smiled mischievously. "It's really troublesome, isn't it?" Rex snorted and remained silent. Shirley walked to the door of the confinement room, her light green eyes curved, and she bent 2 fingers and knocked on the iron door. "Little one." Upon hearing Shirley's voice, Tang An immediately got up from the ground and eagerly grabbed the doorknob. His dark eyes peered straight through the iron door at Shirley. Realizing that Shirley couldn't see her, Tang An shouted, "Yes." Shirley couldn't help but smile, then furrowed her brows and said slightly seriously, "Little guy, Bullman's bar doesn't allow murder." There was no sound inside, and Shirley seemed to imagine Tang An stubbornly pursing her lips, sighing slightly, and looking at Rex with a helpless expression on her face. Rex couldn't resist and raised an eyebrow. After a long silence inside, Tang An's muffled voice finally came. "What's wrong with Lauren?" Shirley's eyebrows and eyes furrowed, she straightened up, spoke in a serious tone, and knocked on the iron door with a hint of warning. "Little guy, this is not something you should worry about." Inside the iron gate, Tang An's eager eyes quickly dimmed, and after a moment of silence, he finally let out a muffled "oh." Shirley raised her eyebrows and didn't say anything. She turned around with her hands in her pockets and was about to leave when she heard Tang An whispering inside the iron door. "I'm sorry." Shirley's feet froze as she walked out, her light green eyes slightly widened, even Rex's hand wiping the gun stopped. Tang An couldn't see the situation outside, paused for a moment, and muttered in a lower and quieter voice, "And Rex." Shirley couldn't help but laugh, her cat-like eyes curved and she looked at Rex with a teasing look, her shoulders trembling with laughter. Rex's face showed an unnatural expression, his tongue pressed against his cheek, and he lowered his head to play with the gun in his hand. Shirley had enough laughter before finally putting it aside. She coughed lightly and knocked on the iron door. "Little one." Tang An let out a "Why apologize?" Tang An stopped talking. "If you don't want to be sent away," Shirley said with a smile, "I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." There is still no sound inside the iron door. Rex raised his eyebrows and gestured to Sherry. Sherry glanced meaningfully at the silent iron door, shrugged her shoulders, and walked back side by side with Rex. "Are you really planning to send this little ghost away?" Rex asked as he walked some distance and touched his tall nose. "You're right, Watanabe is a good choice." Shirley smiled as she reached for the cigarette pack and handed it to Rex, but Rex waved her hand and refused. "Well, you're really into this habit." Shirley shook her head with a hint of regret, picked up one of her own, and lit the cigarette. "The smell of smoke can affect judgment." Rex licked his teeth with his tongue and squinted his icy blue eyes. "If that bastard causes any trouble at Watanabe, we're all done." "Well," Shirley slowly exhaled a puff of smoke and looked up at Rex with interest, "what trouble do you think she can cause?" Rex put his hands in his pockets and moved the stiff muscles around his neck, without saying anything. "Don't worry," Shirley smiled and patted Rex's muscular shoulder. "You're joking, scare her." Rex's face darkened as he took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, leave that little ghost to you. I'll go see Lauren." Shirley raised one eyebrow and said, "Lauren." Rex's footsteps stopped, licking his teeth, his ice blue eyes flickering with a bit of crazy excitement. "If I want to kill Lauren, this is definitely the best way." Shirley's eyebrows raised even higher. In the medical room, Melissa cursed and cleaned Jason's wound. Johnson covered the bandaged wound on his neck with a gloomy expression, and his hand was dripped. Across the bed was Lauren, who had already died. "Damn it." Can we move to another place? When I see him, my neck hurts. Melissa looked up angrily and glared at Johnson. If you have the ability, you can tell him to leave. Damn it, I don't want to turn around. As soon as the words fell, the door to the medical room was opened with a loud bang, and Rex leaned against the door and glanced at the stiff Lauren. Melissa, what's going on? Melissa's face didn't look very good, but she didn't argue with Rex. She threw the autopsy report to Rex and said, drug addict, crazy. Damn it, you have to trouble me with this. Rex flipped through the report casually and threw it aside. He glanced at Johnson on the hospital bed, took out a pack of cigarettes, and threw it to him. Is everything okay? Damn it, it hurts me so much. Jason let out a complaint and lit a cigarette, taking a deep breath. Shit. Rex smiled and leaned against the door, raising an eyebrow at Melissa. If you had come earlier, he wouldn't have had to take such a bite, he said. Melissa snorted coldly and took a cigarette from Johnson's hand. I can only rely on my mother, I'm not God, she said. Rex let out a hee-hee and remained silent. He walked over to Lauren's body, flicked Lauren's stiff face, and twisted his fingers. Melissa placed her arms at the foot of the bed, watched Rex's movements, and raised her chin towards the corpse. This guy's nerves have broken, and even if he doesn't fire those 2 shots, he will eventually die, she said. Rex raised his eyebrows and remained silent. On the 10th day of the racetrack. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. When Rex went to the medical room, Shirley changed into a motorcycle suit and went to the Bourman racecourse. Motorcycle bullets rushed across the track, and Shirley, as usual, took the lead with a beautiful bend, leaving several racers far behind. The cold wind blew over Shirley's tight motorcycle suit, and the sound of friction between the motorcycle and the track echoed in her ears. Shirley's thinking became incredibly clear in this extreme sport. Rex is right, Lauren's death was by no means accidental. Shirley's car suddenly turned the corner, without slowing down, leaving only ghostly tail lights. As for the person who killed Lauren, Shirley gradually had a vague concept in her mind. Shirley's motorcycle rode ahead without a trace, but soon, the engine noise approaching at high speed from the rear track pulled Shirley's thoughts back. A contestant has caught up. As soon as Shirley realized this, a Yamaha had already overtaken her car with a whoosh. The man in front had an extremely arrogant figure, and after overtaking, he made a beautiful bend and glanced at Sherry with his helmet on. A very familiar feeling. Casual, lazy, and relaxed with moderation. Shirley's eyebrows and eyes furrowed as she lowered her body. Harley's speed suddenly increased and he raced out, rubbing against terrifying sounds on the track. The tall figure of the man in front gradually drew closer, and Shirley frowned and let out a faint breath. Before he could catch his breath, the man's motorcycle accelerated again and instantly distanced itself from Sherry. The man's car almost crashed into a wreckage on the track, leaving Sherry behind. The people on the stands were already stunned. The stands, which were originally shouting wildly, were as silent as death, and everyone held their breath as they watched the 2 people compete in front of each other. Crazy competition. The other contestants were thrown away from afar, with only these 2 motorcycles chasing fiercely on the track at a speed that was almost terrifying. Swinging through a bend, the finish line appeared in front of her from afar. Shirley looked at the arrogant figure riding ahead, her eyebrows slightly lowered. Shirley clenched the handlebar and was about to accelerate and sprint, only to find that the front of the car under her hand was trembling uncontrollably. It can't be any faster. As soon as this idea came out, 2 locomotives had already raced past the finish line. Yamaha drifted cleanly to a stop, with Harley following closely behind and beautifully swinging to a stop next to Yamaha. The people on the stands shouted wildly, some cheered loudly, and some cursed repeatedly. No one thought Sherry would lose, who knows how many billionaires will lose this time and go bankrupt. Shirley took off her helmet, her silver curly hair falling gracefully on her cheek, and her pale green eyes fixed on the tall man under the helmet. The man tilted his neck and his stiff muscles made a sound. Under Shirley's gaze, the man smiled and finally took off his helmet, revealing a pair of golden eyes. Andrew. Shirley narrowed her eyes and hung her helmet on the handlebar, showing a teasing smile. I didn't expect Mr. Andrew to be interested in this kind of activity, she said. Andrew's golden eyes looked down at Sherry and shrugged his shoulders. Don't misunderstand, Andrew said, frowning and bending over, with a slight curl in his lips. I'm just interested in you. Shirley laughed heartily upon hearing this, adding a touch of elegance and charm to her already bright face. Having laughed enough, Shirley finally got closer and curved her eyes, saying, all the men here are interested in me. Andrew raised his eyebrows and nodded in agreement with the statement, indeed. Shirley's eyebrows and eyes curved even more, teasingly curling the corners of her mouth. And Mr. Andrew is no different. Andrew pressed his tongue against his back teeth, his golden eyes fixed on Shirley, as if he was still considering how to reply to this sentence. Shirley keenly sensed the displeasure in Andrew's eyes, and before she could react, she felt a blur in front of her. Her waist tightened, leaving only Andrew's sturdy back in sight. Andrew actually picked her up directly from his waist and carried her on his shoulder. Shirley's eyes widened slightly, and her knee reflexively pressed against Andrew's chest, bending her elbow as she was about to strike. But Andrew easily weighed her on his shoulder, holding on to Shirley's slender waist with one hand and gripping her bent knee with the other. How about this? Is it still not much different? Andrew's slightly teasing voice sounded above, deep and casual, as he climbed up from Shirley's back with a tingling sensation. Due to her posture, Shirley's face turned crimson, and all her silver curls slid off her shoulders, forcing her arms to rest against Andrew's broad back. After adjusting her breathing, Shirley struggled to hee-hee, and her voice became low and sexy due to her posture. That's really impolite. Andrew chuckled casually, didn't say anything, and carried Shirley straight off the track. Shirley is tall, with long legs and a full figure. Even an ordinary man can't easily hold her, while Andrew carries her with one hand and whistles all the way to the parking lot. Every time Shirley struggled along the way, Andrew gently weighed her and held her waist with a big hand, like a pair of pliers, making it impossible for Shirley to break free. There is only one off-road vehicle in the parking lot, which is Andrew's powerful Wrangler. Andrew whistled as he opened the passenger door, propped his hand on the door frame, and pushed Shirley straight in. Pushing Sherry in, Andrew half of his body also leaned in, and the cramped space in the passenger seat became even more cramped. Shirley's silver hair was slightly disheveled, and Andrew's gilded eyes, like Arian's, were within reach. The cramped space is filled with the addictive smell of tobacco. Andrew grinned and reached out to pull the back of the chair, forcing Sherry to slowly lie down. This angle made Sherry's plump figure even more sexy. Andrew's hands rested on Shirley's ear, approaching her body slightly. From the outside of the car, the scenery inside is quite ambiguous. So what about that? Andrew put on his hypocritical and gentlemanly smile again, revealing two pale canine teeth. Did it leave an impression on you? Shirley's pale green eyes flickered slightly as she stared at Andrew's approaching face. Her throat twitched and she elicited a captivating smile, saying, "Ah, that's really impressive." The two looked at each other in such an ambiguous position for a long time. Andrew licked his teeth and smiled, then got out of the passenger seat and retreated from Sherry's sight. Shirley blinked and slowly adjusted the back of the chair. Going back to the bar. Andrew activated his Wrangler and placed one hand on the steering wheel, tapping slightly twice. Of course, Mr. Andrew. Shirley straightened her disheveled silver hair in the rearview mirror, tilted her head left and right, admiring her hairstyle. Andrew glanced at her with residual light, curled his lips, and started the car. You don't need to tidy up to be sexy enough. Of course, but I think it's more sexy. The wrangler drove all the way to the Bourman Bar. Like last time, Andrew put Shirley down and left. A man saw Andrew's wrangler and immediately blew a whistle, his sticky gaze fixed on Shirley's protruding motorcycle suit. Someone touched their chin and laughed loudly. "Hey, Shirley, how is Andrew?" As Shirley walked inside with her long legs, she smiled and pushed away the tall man who was approaching her. She raised her eyebrows at him and said, "You should go and experience it yourself, my dear. It's perfect for you." The people in the bar burst into laughter, shouting, "Bottom," and "Honey," and someone even reached out to pat the man's buttocks. "Hey, Sherry," a blonde white man vaguely hugged Sherry's shoulder and blew a breath in her ear. "Andrew can't do it." "How am I?" "Ryan." Shirley hugged her arm and looked up and down at the white man, raising her eyebrows. You're still more suitable for Bruce." She turned to the lively Bruce on the second floor and said, "Is that right, Bruce?" Black Bruce immediately whistled and laughed loudly. "Hey Ryan, do you want to try my bottle opener?" "Fuck." Ryan cursed ominously, and there was another burst of unrestrained and annoying laughter in the bar. Shirley also burst into laughter. "Honey," a beautiful woman whistled at Shirley on stage. "Are you ready to come back, dear?" "Oh, of course," Shirley smiled and curved her eyes, throwing a kiss at the beautiful woman. "I'm back." The people in the bar were all boiling up, cheering, applauding, and screaming loudly. They rushed towards the dance floor, pushing Sherry to the center. Shirley wore a carefree smile on her face, dancing to the guitarist's crazy music, her silver hair dancing with the rhythm of the lights, and she generously displayed her perfect figure. Everyone in the room was cheering and screaming. The scene was once crazy. Since Shirley took over as the head, in order to avoid suspicion, she has stopped at the Bourman Bar and only comes back once every 3 days. But in the past, Sherry was not only the most famous thug at the Bullman Bar, but also the spiciest dancer in the entire bar. Sherry is the soul of the Bourman Bar, as everyone once believed. This boiling lasted for several hours until some people started drinking too much, and Shirley was able to escape from the enthusiasm of the people. Walking up the stairs, Sherry looked up and saw Rex leaning against the door of a room. Rex was playing with a cigarette in his hand, his ice blue eyes slightly squinting, with an extreme calmness that was out of place with the entire bar, overlooking the chaotic and crazy frenzy on the dance floor. Shirley raised her eyebrows. "There's not even a cigarette lit." Shirley walked over with her leather boots and took the cigarette out of Rex's hand. She twirled her fingers around the cigarette and raised her eyes, curled her lips, and smiled. "How's it going?" After a brief examination, Rex straightened up and moved the muscles and bones around his neck, his icy blue eyes hanging down and staring straight at Sherry. "It's not a drug addiction, it's a hallucination caused by an overdose." Shirley nodded and lit the cigarette, taking a sip. Smoke flowed out of Shirley's red lips and said, "Sure enough. There are only 2 people here who can prepare a large amount of drugs," Rex said with both hands in his pockets, licking his teeth, his eyes sparkling like some kind of hunting panther. Shirley raised her eyebrows unexpectedly and said, "2." Rex's icy blue eyes looked straight at Sherry and narrowed slightly. "Melissa, with you." Shirley's eyebrows raised even higher. Watching Shirley's playful smile on her face, Rex's eyebrows twitched, and the predatory demeanor finally disappeared. "Joking." "Of course," Shirley smiled and shrugged her shoulder while smoking. "If you doubt me, you won't come looking for me, will you?" Rex frowned and nodded. After a pause, Rex glanced at Shirley and asked, "What should I do?" The voice was cold and cruel, as if with just one command from Shirley, the killer could be killed without any hesitation. How to deal with it? A thug, a doctor, Shirley squinted her eyes and smoked intoxicated. How else can we make a choice? This is the meaning of ignoring it. Speaking of which, how's that little guy doing? Shirley took a puff of smoke and hugged her arm with interest. After all, I have been locked up in a small dark room for a whole day. Go and take a look. When the two of them passed through the corridor, they could see from a distance that the door of the small black room was wide open, and there must be no one inside anymore. Fuck. Rex cursed and walked over with a gloomy expression, only to see the blood on the ground, the chaos in the room, and the key inserted on the door. The small black room was in a mess, with fragments of clothes, dried blood, and a blood-stained iron rod pried off from the miscellaneous items in the corner. A pool of blood stains extended from the door and continued to drip towards the other end of the corridor. Rex and Shirley exchanged a glance, and Shirley shrugged her shoulders, while Rex's face was not very attractive.